Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Picard Season 3. As a whole, in this video, I will review all of Season 3 of Star Trek Picard. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Picard Season 3 up to the very end, up to the very last episode. So if you have not seen all of Star Trek Picard Season 3, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things will be spoiled for you. So my overall feeling for Picard Season 3 is that it's a mixed bag. The other thing I would say about Season 3 of Picard is that it's overrated. I definitely think it is overrated. I've seen the fan hype and even people who say to hate Star Trek Picard or hate anything Alex Kurtzman touches or hate any kind of new Star Trek seem to like this show, and some will go as far to say it's easily the best show and the savior of the franchise, and Terry Matalas should be put in charge of every single show. I very strongly disagree with that. To me, this is actually more of the same. It's just like the rest of Picard's, well, not Season 2. Season 2 is a dumpster fire. But it's like Picard Season 1, and it's like pretty much every season of Discovery. It's a mixed bag. There's some things that are great, some things that are not so great. And it's not consistent, and it has a lot of issues. I think Strange New Worlds is easily the best. Season 1 is still the best season of New Trek. I think it's like far superior to this season, in my opinion. I also prefer most seasons of Lower Decks and Prodigy to this season. In fact, there's a couple seasons of Discovery, Season 2 and 4, I probably would even say are better than this season. But not by much, because I think most of Discovery and Picard Season 1 and this season are all in the same category as being a mixed bag, where there's some things I like, some things I don't like, some things that I think are amazing, and other things that bother the hell out of me. And that is my overall take on Picard Season 3. And yeah, I think it's overrated because it seems like the majority of reviewers and critics out there have been overwhelmingly positive and acting like this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's no sliced bread involved, in my opinion. I like sliced bread, but I don't know. I don't get that saying. But anyway, yeah, and even people who were very critical of the first two seasons of Picard and all of Discovery, all of a sudden were acting like they love this. And honestly, I think they were succumbing to fan service, which is, I didn't really get to me. Like, I don't know. This is just not what I'm looking for. And now, I did like the inclusion of legacy characters, and I do want to see more of that and stuff that, help the plot along. I love seeing character stories, and I love the way they resolved character stories. I put that in the positive camp. But, yeah, this other than that, like, I don't need to see every single fucking ship that's been in the Star Trek franchise. That does nothing for me. Anyway, so I want to structure this review as talking about what I liked about the seasons, the positives, what I didn't like about the season, the negatives, what I mixed on, and the neutral things. So I actually thought I would begin with the positives because I know that the majority of people out there love this season. So I want to start with, I'm going to pander to them, start by pandering to them by starting out with what I did like about the season, so not has to scare them away at the very start of my video, but then after that I will get into the negatives of what I didn't like about the season, and then I'll end the video on the things I was kind of mixed or neutral about. Now, I have gotten a lot of comments on my videos for people who support me, who agree with my opinion. In fact, I've heard from several people who disliked this season more than I did, which it is refreshing to get that opinion. And there's a few other, reviewers out there who also were just as negative, if not more negative than I was, but they seem to be few and far between. I seem to be in the minority here by not saying this is the greatest thing ever. So, let me go ahead and jump into starting with my positives. I'll start with what I did like about the season. So, I'm going to go in order. Not in order of when these events occurred in the show, but I decided to go in order of my favorites, my absolute favorite things to my lowest of my favorite things. So I'm going to start with the thing I liked the most about the season, and that is resolving Rose's storyline. Now, this was a small thing, and I guess I'm probably a bit biased here because I'm such a fan of Rose, and I really, really wanted to see her storyline resolved, and I never thought it would happen. I just always assumed it was never going to happen, so I was actually shocked that I got not only did Rose reappear, but we got a very, very satisfying conclusion to her storyline. That having her and Picard finally having it out and going over how she disappointed him and how she felt of that he had abandoned her, and them hashing it out and coming to this agreement and willing to work with each other to resolve the current crisis, and ultimately her sacrificing herself to save Picard, to save Starfleet. I was in tears. It was a very effective storyline, and it was so good. Now, I know some would claim this is counter to my claim that I didn't like the fan service, but again, as I mentioned, my caveat to that is I like the character stories. I don't really see this as fan service. I mean, some could say, yeah, you're bringing back Rose to please the fans, but for me, fan service is like, oh, here's Rose, you remember her, and there she is again, no reason. But that's not what they did. It was a effective character story that resolved a long time hole, something that was missing in the Star Trek franchise that I never thought would be resolved. And to see Michelle Forbes again reprise the role, do an amazing job as always. And as I said, to have that touching ending where she sacrifices herself and that conflict, it was written like the character interactions and how they hashed out their differences was written so well. So yeah, this is definitely the highlight of the season for me. Next up in my positives, I'm actually going to go with the Worf and Raffi team up. I talked about, if you saw my reviews of the first 2 seasons of Picard, Raffi was my least favorite character, and I was very unhappy that she was the only character that they took over from previous seasons. I would have much rather seen someone like Soji or Elnor than Raffi, who I was not a fan of. But I was surprised that they actually made her very interesting, and by teaming her up with Worf, and the two of them had amazing chemistry that really sold. In fact, in the first couple episodes, I was way more interested in this storyline than what was going on in the Titan A. So every time they cut back to it, I was like, yes, they're cutting back to it, because yeah, the chemistry between these two characters was so great. It was great seeing them and their investigation. It was great the way they introduced Worf, but at first having him just be text on the screen, and people could kind of guess that it was Worf, and I think that was cool, and I think it was great that they resolved it. And Worf, just this entire season was just such a highlight, whether he was with Raffi or not, if he was with Riker or Troy or whatever. Like, I think maybe they overplayed him as the comic relief a couple of times, but for the most part, he was definitely a huge highlight of the season. And I did not think this team up would work as well as it did. So next up in my positives is the Jack and Jean-Luc relationship. Now, Before the season was released, I heard rumors that there's this new character that we saw in the trailers who appeared to be in his 20s. There's rumors that he would be revealed to be the son of Jean-Luc Picard in Beverly Crusher, and I thought, God, that's stupid. But they actually sold it to me for the show's credit. Because, to be honest, this is something that was very apparent to me in the first 2 seasons of Picard, so I think this is kind of correcting or filling in that hole from the first 2 seasons, is that Picard didn't have an heir. He felt like it was a miserable existence because he didn't have anyone to continue his family name, to continue his storyline, and so introducing Jack, I think, fixes that. And plus, the way they introduced Jack, like, I totally bought that Crusher would hide him from Jean-Luc. And this creating sort of daddy issues, and at first that he was very reluctant to know him, but over the season they've grown to appreciate each other more. And then we had that one flashback of when Jack actually did seek out Jean-Luc in the past, but Jean-Luc was talking to cadets and telling them that Starfleet was the only family he ever needed, which of course pushed Jack away. And that was so great. Like, that was really good writing, and that was a great reveal. And I loved how they played that off. And actually, I think, as you'll see in this video, the last 2 episodes are almost entirely be my negatives list. But one of the positive things I can say from those last 2 episodes is Jean-Luc admitting and like coming full circle and admitting to Jack that he does need him as a family. He does need a son. And that felt like a well-earned resolution. And I thought that really worked. So next in my positives is the ending resolution to Vadic's storyline. It's basically the events of episode 8, which I feel should have been the last episode of the season. And for me, in my opinion, this is the true finale. But I'll get more to that in my negatives. But yeah, this is so good. This was a really effective, really suspenseful storyline. I did not expect it to be as good as it was. But they pulled it off so well, seeing Vadic threaten the people on the bridge, seeing Jack and Jean-Luc and Beverly trapped in this corner while Beverly wants to do it, and seeing Data. I'll get to Data later, actually. But the ending resolution where Data takes over the ship and says like, greetings, so like in his own thing, was such an amazing moment. Like, I just wanted to get up and cheer and clap. And when 7 of 9 like blows Vadic out into space and says, "Get off my bridge!" Again, I want to be like, yes, that is going in my top 10 one-liners of all Star Trek right there. And it was so suspenseful leading up to it, and it did for most of the season. And like, it seemed like Vadic always had the upper hand, and they were always fucked in the sea. Then finally get this well-earned victory over her was a really good cathartic moment that I did really appreciate. So next on my positives is Geordi and Data's relationship. Their friendship. This is something that was missing from the TNG movies because they focused too much on Picard and Data in the TNG movies and in Picard Season 1 because Geordi wasn't in it at all. And Geordi and Data's friendship was always a strength of TNG. It was always, that's who Data should have been connecting with this time, Geordi, not Picard. And to see when at first Data would look like he would lose to Lore and die yet again for a third time, Geordi like pleading with them, saying like, when you died it broke me, and like pleading with him to fight, that was like, I think, the best performance in the entire show. That again was very touching and had me in tears. And then later, once Data did take over the body and defeat Lore, seeing Geordi and Data interact and catching up on old times was so gratifying. I mean, this really, in this way, it did really fix what was lacking in the movies, and did really give us a very satisfying resolution, which I did appreciate a lot. So next on my positive list, sticking with Data, is Data's resurrection. The way that he tricked Lore into defeating him by giving him all of these sort of trinkets. I mean, yeah, you could say it was a bit of fan service. But again, if it served the story and served the character story, so if it serves the character story, I'm okay with a little bit of fan service. Just like as long as it's not just there to say, oh, look, you remember that? Which I'll get to in my negatives, which this I don't think was the case because it made a lot of sense. And it also applies to Moriarty appearing on the station. I know a lot of people complained about that, but to me that was hinting at Data was there controlling the station, and that was Data's inner, thoughts, showing Riker images he would recognize. So I think, again, it served the story, so I'm fine with it. I just hated the fact they included it in the trailer because it made it seem like Moriarty would play a much bigger role in the season, but that's an issue I have with the trailer, not with the show itself, which is the marketing department, something totally different. So, but yeah. I like the way that Data defeated Lore, and again, as I said, seeing him take control and blow Vadic out the bridge was so gratifying. So next, and also before I move on, the fact introducing this concept of a Data, a new android that is an amalgamation of Data and Lore, and it's like Data, but it's a different version of Data. He's a bit more human, and he has emotions, and again, they're doing him being human better than what the movies did, and it was very satisfying. And I think this is what they should have done with Data all along. Like the whole plot in season 1, I think they should have done 86 that and done this instead. But, so now moving on to my next positive is the Changelings' involvement. I thought it was very fascinating bringing in the Changelings from DS9. I did not mind at all that they brought in a DS9 villain because this is all one Star Trek universe. In fact, I think that TNG should have acknowledged that none of the other Star Trek shows really acknowledged the Dominion or the Dominion War enough. And so to get that there's a faction of Changelings that sort of splintered off from the main group that was disgruntled, and of course eventually we get Vadic's backstory that explains exactly why they were disgruntled, because they were mistreated by Section 31, and how they just want to and how they fully infiltrate Starfleet. It felt like the storyline that DS9 Season 3 was setting up for, but never really went all in on, and we finally got that here in this season of Picard, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So next on my positives list is seeing the TNG crew reunited around the conference table for the first time in how many years it's been was super gratifying. Again, people could say this is a bit of fan service, but again, I think it involves the characters, and it involves seeing these characters again and seeing the character interactions and seeing them feel like they're old characters. So I think it goes beyond just a bit of fan service. I loved it. Alright, so next in my positive list is Geordi's reluctance to help Picard, and the fact that he was, wanted to keep his daughter safe and didn't want to put him in danger, and Picard, and they had to have this inner conflict where Sydney had to convince her father to help, and the interactions between them were like really well written, well acted. I think it gave Geordi a really depth to his character, and it made sense that he wouldn't automatically be like, okay, Picard, let's go help. That he would be like, well, no, I have fucking daughters to worry about. And I think it made total sense, and it added nuance to the story. So next on my positive list is Tuvok's cameo. Again, I think I loved, because I don't see this as fan service, because they could have made up a new character for 7 of 9 or someone else to interact with. But why do that when you already have existing characters? And plus, I think the callbacks to Voyager and how 7 of 9 discovered it was a changeling and not really Tuvok, by saying, by making reference to something that Tuvok did, and says that I was saved by a mind meld from my friend. And it felt so satisfying. And then seeing him pop up again in the finale, where he was the one to promote her to captain, I thought was extremely fitting. that it would be him and not some random admiral. It just gave it a lot more power and a lot more weight. And yeah, it was great seeing this character again. And finally, in my category of positives, I will say Shaw growing to respect 7 of 9. I thought this was a well-earned story arc for Shaw, that he was very much against her from the start and refused to actually call her 7 of 9, and that was she earned his respect throughout the season, where finally, right before his death, he showed her full respect, saying that she was the captain now, and called her 7 of 9. It was really touching, and I think well-earned. So, that is it for my positives. So guess what? Time to get to my negatives. Now, if you love this show and you agreed with everything I just said, well, now prepare yourselves to disagree with everything I'm about to say. So, at the very tippy top of my list of negatives, what I hated most about this season, the ending Borg storyline felt like fan fiction written by a 15-year-old. It did. Now, on my list of negatives, you will not find the inclusion of the Borg. Instead, I'm saying the Borg storyline felt like fan fiction written by a 15-year-old, which is a distinction, because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I didn't like the fact they brought in the Borg. And believe me, I was feeling the same way. I was hoping it wasn't the Borg. But I wasn't automatically saying, well, if you include the Borg, it's automatically going to suck. Because when they showed it was the Borg, I was like, okay, fine. What are you going to do with the Borg? Are you going to do something good? But the answer is no, it didn't. So if they done something good with the Borg, I would be fine with it. I would be like, okay, grant you, I would rather they not include the Borg, but if they did something good with it, then I'll be like, okay, fine. I'll give you a pass. You did something good with them. There you go. But they didn't. This whole storyline was convoluted and very reminiscent of the storylines they've done with the Borg that I hate the most throughout Voyager, such as in Dark Frontier, Unimatrix Zero, and Endgame, my least favorite episode of the entire franchise, or one of them. And so this two-parter did remind me of it was so silly and ridiculous and nonsensical. It did feel like fan fiction written by a 15-year-old because, let's get the changelings to have an alliance with the Borg, which that makes zero sense. And, let's have the Borg then use, like, Picard's DNA. He was assimilated for like 2 days, but we'll use his DNA to put it in the transporter system to assimilate everyone under 25, and how convenient it is for a show where it's a reunion show of much older characters that only affects people under 25, and it simultaneously assimilates everyone. And they're relying on the fact that Starfleet has very dumbly decided to link all their ships together, making it a hell of a lot easier for the Borg to take over and network all the ships together. And Shelby, the person who was chief in charge of, destroying the Borg, was the admiral who approved this. That's dumb. That makes no sense. And as I mentioned in my review, they called this out. I can't believe Shelby was the one to do it. Calling out your plot holes does not fix them. It just points out that it's a plot hole. And then the fact that Jack Crusher, who again was this just because he was the son of Picard, who was assimilated for 2 days. It might have been 2 months, but it doesn't really matter. It wasn't that long. The fact that he was this amplifier, freaking, transmitter or whatever, just because he's Picard's son is something I absolutely, totally, 1000% do not buy. And then seeing the Borg Queen again, I hate the Borg Queen, and I hate the way they used her. And seeing her, like, in the fact that Jack just, as soon as he found out he was, being manipulated by the Borg, his response was to go straight to them and give himself right to them and allow this whole bullshit to happen. Like, this is such a you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of William Shatner, the Shatnerverse. I don't know if you heard, he wrote a series of novels that were so dumb, they were so terrible, and involved the Borg teaming up with the Romulans in order to resurrect Captain Kirk to turn him into a weapon against to use against Starfleet. It's so dumb, and yet this feels just like that. Except that instead of the Romulans making a nonsensical alliance with the Borg, it's the Changelings. And instead of using Kirk, they're using Picard's son. And it's funny. It kind of makes sense though, because apparently Terra Mentalis, they had that Easter egg earlier in the season where Kirk's body was at Daystrom Station, and he said, "Oh, that was a shout out. That was like a reference, an Easter egg towards those novels." Those novels are terrible. Anyway, and it's nonsensical fan fiction. That's how it comes off, exactly as dumb. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to have the Changelings team up and they can use Captain Picard's son as an amplifier and they assimilate the entire... And so another thing worth mentioning that I mentioned in my reviews already was the fact that this comes off as there was this episode of Voyager where the Doctor was daydreaming. They had this daydream where the entire crew of Voyager was instantly assimilated, allowing him to take command and save the day. And this is pretty much that, except taking seriously, because that was a joke. It was a funny joke because of how ridiculous it is. Yet here they do it seamlessly. Oh, all of Starfleet is being assimilated to Borg, but only the ones under 25, allowing Picard and the older people to take command and save the day. It's the same fucking thing, and it's just as ridiculous, except this time it's not for comedy. Expect us to take it seriously. So yeah, that is definitely at the top of my list of negatives. So next on my list of negatives is the pacing, and there's a lot of sub categories for this because that's a broad category. So I'm going to list off the subcategories that come with pacing in this season, which again, this is a common problem with all the seasons, which is why I disagree with those saying that Picard Season 3 way better than anything Modern Trek has done. It has the same problem that all seasons of Discovery had and all seasons of Picard had. So, all right, let me list up the subgenres or the subjects of this. So, there's the Nebula storyline dragged out for too long. The Mystery of Jack Crusher dragged out for too long. Data's fight with Lore dragged out for too long. A Rose investigation or involvement with the show was too short. We didn't go into enough detail of the Changeling involvement. The Borg plot felt tacked on and at the last minute, and the epilogue dragged on for far too long. So, let me start with the Nebula storyline, because this is something I complained about in my reviews too much. They first introduced this conflict with the Shrike and the Titan A in episode 2, and in episode 3 they went into this nebula to hide from them, and they were hiding from them all the way up to the end of episode 4, and it really felt like, and as I said earlier, every time they cut back to the storyline, I thought I got bored with the show. I was expecting this storyline to be resolved at least by the end of episode 3, but they dragged it on for far too long and really tested my patience, and it really was an example of bad pacing. Next example, the Mystery of Jack Crusher being dragged out for too long. They didn't reveal this until... This is kind of tied into my point. I'll get in later about the Borg. But yeah, they dragged this out for way too long. And in fact, at the end of episode 7, Vadic was like, I'm going to tell you exactly who you are. And she doesn't. And we don't find out until the beginning of episode 9. And and the whole time we're wondering what the deal is, and by the time we got to the reveal, all the fans figured it out anyway, so why drag it out too long? It was terrible pacing. Next is Data's fight with Lore dragged out for too long. Now, I did compliment the resolution of that storyline, but they took an entire episode to do it, and it felt very convenient for the plot. It allowed Vadic to take over the ship. It kind of ties into how I felt Vadic took over the ship way too easily, and that really bothered me as well. But yeah, That dragged out for too long. Rose's involvement was too short. As I said, she was an amazing character, and I love her death. But we should have gotten more of her. They just introduced her and killed her off in the same episode. Not cool. Next is we didn't get enough detail into the changeling involvement, and so this is tied in to that dumbass Borg plot. But those final 2 episodes, as I said, they should have ended at episode 8 with that. Otherwise, the final 2 episodes should have been about them weeding out the changelings and getting into more detail of why there's a changeling faction, how maybe getting the other changelings involved. Now I know Rene Auberjonois has sadly passed away, so you couldn't have Odo, but you could have an emissary of Odo. Maybe it could even be Kieran Nerys or something. I would love more of that fan service if it's a character who I want to see who is important to the story. And to me, that would have been a billion times better than that fan fiction we got with the Borg. And then the Borg plot felt tacked on at the last minute. Yeah, now I know people are going to be like, well, there were hints throughout the entire season. You pay attention, they're really making hints. I know, and that's why a lot of people figured out that it was the Borg. But that doesn't help. That doesn't make the difference at the fact that they didn't actually reveal it was the Borg, other than dumb hints, until the second to last episode. And so the whole, so the first episode introduced this mystery, and then from episode 3 onwards is changelings. They're dead now. It's the Borg. Out of nowhere, it's a Borg for 2 episodes. It's terrible pacing. That was terribly placed. If you're going to do the changelings, do the changelings. If you're going to do the Borg, do the fucking Borg. Don't just tack them on at the last 2 minutes. It's dumb. Bad pacing. And then finally, in the subject of pacing, is the epilogue dragged on for too long. I think this is worse than Return of the King. And again, I actually thought I didn't actually have an issue with Return of the King, and I think everyone else is wrong saying it had too many endings. I think it only had one ending that was too many. Where this, like, it was all well and good to see the crew play poker and call back to all good things. I don't have an issue with that. I have an issue with the fact that scene dragged out for too long, and I have an issue with the fact that they had this Data going to counseling with Troy. Did we really need to see that? It felt like, okay, come on, let's wrap things up. And another scene, which I'll get to later in my negatives, was unnecessary. But anyway, so that's it for pacing. So now let me move on to my next negative, which is the tone of the show was that of the TNG movies, not the Next Generation show itself. And this is something I feel very strongly about, but apparently a lot of people have a different perspective. So it is a very subjective opinion, I will admit that, but I feel so strongly about that it actually shocks me that people could see it any other way. Because, first of all, what really bothered me is towards the beginning of the season where Shaw kept calling out Picard and Riker. Now, it didn't bother me that he was being an asshole to our hero characters. That's fine. But it bothered me that his specific argument fell flat to me, because it's like, you guys are reckless. You just get into fights. You just want to blow shit up. Which is actually not true. It's not true to the characters. It's out of character for them to say that. Maybe if he's talking about the characters from the movies, but from the show itself, they do negotiations. They bring out treaty violations, section A1/B4, or they go to concerts on the fucking 10 forward, or they have like transporter nonsense, or Picard like experiences a family that he never had on an alien planet. They do shit like that. They're not action heroes. They're not all about defying orders and being reckless. That's not who these characters are. So it's like, who the fuck are you talking about? You're not talking about Picard and Riker, unless you're talking about the movies version of them. But the versions of them that we saw were more action orientated. We saw Crusher going with this like phaser rifle. That I never saw her do that on the show. I saw her do that on the movies, and the music was very reminiscent of the movies. I've heard great things about the music before the season started. I was really looking forward to it, but they just directly pulled music directly from the movies and deposited it here. That's not good music. I wanted something unique, not just a reminiscent. And by the way, I never really liked the music in the TNG movies except for Generations. Now, I've heard some people say that this reminded them more of the original series movies, but again, I don't understand that perspective, because first the music, the aesthetics, like the ship, the Shrike looked a lot like the Scimitar from Nemesis, and these particular, especially the way it growled, like that really annoyed me. Ships don't growl. I think the Scimitar growled as well. And the aesthetics, the action scenes were very reminiscent of the TNG movies, not the TOS movies. And whenever they did make reference to the TOS movies, it just felt like TNG movies to me, because the TNG movies were trying to rip off the TOS movies anyway. So if ever they paid homage to the Wrath of Khan, for example, I didn't think of the Wrath of Khan. I thought of like First Contact or Nemesis, because they also were making references to the Wrath of Khan, because we're not seeing the TOS characters, we're seeing older versions of the TNG characters just like we did in the movies. So it shocks me beyond belief how anyone could not make any connection, who could say, oh, this is the resolution to the show we never got. No, it's not. It's the movies. They're not doing the show. These are not the characters from the show. These are the characters from the movies, and the aesthetics is from the movies, from the TNG movies, not the TOS movies. But, so that is definitely, and I'm not a huge fan of the TNG movies. The show was better. I'd rather see more character-based stuff. I'd rather see them do diplomacy and not having this big sort of set piece where the Earth is in danger. That's another thing that why it's very similar to other seasons of Picard and Discovery, because they always have to fall back to these big high stakes. Everything's in danger. Earth is in danger. The Borg are going to take over. Changeling took over all of Starfleet. We're in danger. We're all fucked. I really think modern Trek needs to get away from that kind of storytelling as a whole. And Strange New Worlds, to its credit, did, which is why I like it way better. Anyway, next is an overabundance of fan service, which I hinted at before. And there are subcategories in this as well. So first subcategory of overabundance of fan service is having all the ships at the shipyard. That's totally unnecessary. You do not need. It served no plot function. It was pure fan indulgence, plain and simple. Did not help the story along. Yes, we got that one nice moment where 7 of 9 was reminiscent about the Voyager crew, but she could have done that at any other time. We didn't actually need to see the Voyager ship in order to do that. And having the Defiant and the freaking Klingon ship from Star Trek 4. Why do we need this Klingon ship from Star Trek 4? It was pure self-indulgence, and I was like, it made me ill. It made me physical ill. This is just, it has served no purpose for the story. Next is the Enterprise D, which I know people are going to fight back against. Now, to be fair, it was cool to see them on the Enterprise D again. And I did have that moment, oh wow, this is cool to see them again. But again, I thought the Enterprise E would have been more appropriate, because this is actually, this whole show has the tone of the movies and not the show. So it felt out of place to see these TNG movie characters on the Enterprise D bridge. So yeah, that's one thing. But another thing is, again, it's pure self-indulgent. Now you could say, oh, what's necessary for the plot? Yeah, they contrived the plot to make it necessary, because as I mentioned before, the whole thing about all the ships being networked was bullshit, and it was a dumb plot device, and I can see now why they did it. They did it so they would have to go to the older ship so they could resurrect the Enterprise D to bring it back and save the day on the Enterprise D. It was so contrived, and it was so dumb. So next is, and I don't like how a lot of these critics justify this show because and I've seen all these like fans like really cream themselves over seeing the Enterprise D. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I'm not a ship guy. And as I said, I was kind of cool to see him on the bridge, but I'm not gonna like have repeated nerdgasms over seeing it. They're on the Enterprise D, big deal, especially how contrived it was to fucking get them there in the first place. So, next on Overabundance of Fan Service is referencing the best of both worlds again and again and again and again. As I mentioned, this is enough with the best of both worlds references. It was tired before this season of Picard. And because they have to have a part of Picard's log from that episode playing in the very first episode. And then just because Jean-Luc was assimilated for 2 days, he has his Borg DNA that they use to assimilate everyone and his son as a transmitter. Bullshit it is. So next on my list of negatives is the holodeck still functioning while the Titan was losing power. Now I gotten pushback from this, but I'm going to push back against that pushback because I think this is still total bullshit. Now, someone was pointing out that Voyager pointed out that the holodeck had an independent source, but it's dumb when Voyager did it. It doesn't mean it's not dumb. Just because it was a dumb thing was done before doesn't make it dumb to do it again. But I think it's actually worse here because the whole plot of that particular episode was that Titan was losing power. That was a main plot point. But then in their spare times, fucking Jack and Jean-Luc were hanging out on the fucking holodeck, which uses a tremendous amount of power. I'm like, what the everlasting fuck? And they throw in this dumb line of dialogue to try to justify it, be like, oh, the holodeck has this independent power source. The fuck it does. Then why doesn't someone grab that independent power source and plug it into the main power source to stop everyone from dying? I think that would be a good idea, personally, rather than hanging out at a fucking bar. Why don't you have a real bar on the ship like 10 Forward? What a waste of power. It was so stupid. It's just a contrived excuse to use that dumb 10 Forward set on the show, which brings me to my next negative, using the 10 Forward bar as a regular set piece. The whole concept of Guinan having a 10 Forward bar on Earth that they introduced in Picard Season 2 was so dumb. I don't need to be reminded about how terrible Season 2 was, and you don't need to keep going to that bar. Why didn't they just create a new bar? Anyway, sorry. I'm getting a little heated going through this. Next is the Enterprise D acting like an X-Wing fighter. And that's in the finale where they do a Star Wars, to quote the pitch meetings. You did a Star Wars. All was missing is that I guess War should have won like, oh sorry, I'm trying to do the Chewbacca thing, but I can't do it as well, especially since I got sore throat at the moment. But they should have had War for Chewbacca. It was just like they did a Star Wars. They just did that. And the Enterprise D is such a huge, cumbersome ship to have it behave like an X-Wing makes zero sense. Maybe if they had a Defiant, I could have at least bought it. But of course, the Defiant wouldn't have fans creaming all over themselves. They need the Enterprise D to do it. Roll eye, roll eye. Anyway, next negative is Riker's over-the-top reaction telling Picard he just killed them all. I think it was episode 2 or something like that. That was so out of character for Riker, and that was just such an obviously contrived moment just so they could end the show on a cliffhanger. And it was terrible. It was such an overreaction. That whole fight between Riker and Picard too, where Picard wanted to fight and Riker wanted to run, was kind of dumb as well. So yeah, that was terrible. Next in the negatives was the 10 Forward bar being a regular set. Oh, I already said that. So after that is making a big deal out of 7 of 9's catchphrase at the very end, the final episode, where they're like, what you going to say to say go to warp? Are you going to say warp me? Are you going to say hit it? Are you going to say engage? What's it going to be? Who fucking cares? Like, I was okay with Lower Decks making fun of this and pointing it out because it's, you know, it's a stupid thing Star Trek does, and Lower Decks is a parody show, so them like calling it out and making jokes out is all good for, but then bringing it up here, especially after having just seen it in the Strange New Worlds season 2 trailer, I'm just like, enough with picking on the fucking catchphrases. I'm over it. Anyway, next is Sydney LaForge reminding us every 2 minutes who her father is. I always forgot, like, who is her father again? But it's a good thing she was there to remind me every 2 minutes. Next negative is presenting Section 31 as a normal part of Starfleet intelligence. Yes, this is a minor nitpick and I keep harping on it, but I had to bring this up. Because you might say, well, the Discovery and Strange New Worlds also behaved like Section 31 was part of a normal part of Starfleet that everyone knew about. But you could justify that, well, that's in the 23rd century. Maybe by the time we get to the 24th and 25th century, they're more autonomous, and they seemed like everyone thought that they went away and they weren't around anymore, and they came in. Because Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which this show has referenced heavily during the Dominion War. In fact, they referenced Section 31's part of the Dominion War, but a major part of that was the fact that they were an autonomous group that Starfleet did not officially acknowledge. But in this episode, they're acting like, oh, they're just a part of Starfleet intelligence. The fuck they are. And now I can no longer use, oh, it's a 23rd century excuse, because now they stated it outright in the 25th century. Fuck you very much, Star Trek Picard. Anyway. Okay, so that's it for my negatives. So I can calm down now. So I'll get into the stuff I was neutral or mixed on. It's probably mostly the stuff I was mixed on. I'll start with Riker and Troy's relationship. There were parts of it I loved, and there was parts of it I thought really worked, and I thought these actors were great together, and I loved that they kept these characters together. I thought it was a bit ridiculous that they focused more on Riker being upset over the son's death, because I thought he was over it. Now they did justify this in the show itself. They did make it make sense, but saying that Troy was sort of lifting him emotionally and helping him to forget, and he kind of resented her for doing that. But so it makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but I just don't like it. Like I prefer their interactions in season 1 better. Like I think the episode Nepenthe in season 1 was better, honestly, and I liked Troy, how she behaved in an episode better than she behaved in this show. Just saying, or this season, I should say. So the other thing I was mixed on was the Titan A bridge crew. I mean, my feeling towards the bridge crew is similar to my feeling towards the Discovery bridge crew. Is that it's good that they're consistent, that they have the same actors and the same characters the whole time, that they don't have a rotate of background extras. I like that. But then again, they're not really main characters, and I didn't really form a connection. It doesn't really... It's not as guilty as Discovery is, as thinking I give a shit about any of these characters, which is the fault Discovery falls back on all the time. You haven't developed them. You haven't earned me giving a shit about them. And this show didn't really... wasn't too bad with it, but I feel like it was a little bit, because when they killed off that one Vulcan character, I was like, oh no, it's that Vulcan character who had 2 lines of dialogue. Anyway, again, that's why I'm neutral on it, because I do like some of these characters, and I like they were consistent. Maybe if they do a legacy show, maybe they will actually develop their characters. We'll see. So next is Vanek's over-the-top behavior. I really hated this at first, especially the way that she was chomping on the cigar and was like flipping around, giggling. It reminded me too much of Nero from Star Trek in 2009, which is Not something you want to do, because I fucking hate that movie, and I think Nero is one of the worst villains ever created in the whole franchise, if you consider that part of the franchise, which sadly officially it is, but I like to think it isn't because it's so terrible. So I don't want to be reminded of that, and I think her over-the-top cheesiness was really annoying me, but they did kind of flesh out her character more, and when they delved into her backstory of how she was tortured by Section 31 and took on the image of her torturer, it made me appreciate this character more. So that's why I say overall mixed on her as a villain. And final thing for my neutral mix category will be Raffi's storyline. I put her relationship with Worf in the positive, but her whole storyline with her husband like disavoweling her and their son refusing to see him, and he barely wouldn't even help her and made her try to make this impossible choice, either us or Starfleet. And then at the end of the show, all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, we love you now. Please come back in our lives." It felt kind of unearned. So, I mean, on one hand, I was happy for Raffi, but on the other hand, it's like they went from one extreme to the other too much. So I'm kind of mixed on it. So anyway, those are my lists of my positives, negatives, and mixed. And so my rating for Star Trek Picard Season 3 as a whole is a 6. Good. It was, again, it's a mixed bag. I want to say mixed bag more than good, because there were some things that I loved, as I talked about with my positives, particularly Rose involvement, the Worf and Raffi team up, Jean-Luc and Jack's relationship. The Vadix ending storyline was so suspenseful. It was such a good episode. Data and Geordi's friendship, having their changelings, these are all great stuff. And I would have, honestly, if the show ended at episode 8, or they took the final 2 episodes to focus on the changelings, I would have given this season an 8, possibly even a 9 if those final 2 episodes were really good. But because the final 2 episodes was fan fiction written by a 15-year-old, it takes it all the way down to a 6. And not only was it such a terrible ending involving one of the worst characters in the franchise, the Borg Queen, the pacing was off throughout the entire season. The tone was too much of the movies instead of the Next Generation show. There was way too much fan service in the season, and a lot of other nitpicks that didn't work for me throughout the season. So the best I can give it is a 6. I think the positives are strong enough to warrant a 6, to warrant a positive rating, but the negatives are strong enough where it can't get any higher. So, that is it for my review of Star Trek Picard Season 3. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe, check out my channel, as I cover all sorts of other Star Trek videos at the moment, covering Star Trek the original series 1 episode at a time. And I also cover many other videos on many other shows, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.